Good evening. Tonight we're going to talk about foreign relations during the Civil War and how our relationship with Europe changes during this war. This is lesson 11 of the Civil War, and we're on page 13 of the notes. There are a couple of big issues during the Civil War that we have with foreign governments. First of all is the relationship that those foreign governments have with the Confederacy, and second of all is the actions that those foreign governments take during the Civil War in relationship to helping the Confederacy, or at least trying to maintain relationships with the Union. What you have to know about Europe when we covered this section is that Europe is controlled by kings and queens at this point. And those kings and queens had for a long time seen America as a threat to their own power. It was America that threw off the monarchy during the Revolution 80 years before this, and the democracy that they had established had prospered. The United States becomes the #1 most powerful nation in the West, so in North and South America. But also they had developed an economy that was not just based on agriculture like they were when they were a colony, and they were drawing a number of immigrants from the European countries, people who were seeking freedom and wealth. And those were two things that you could find in America at the time. And so these aristocracies, these governments by the rich and the powerful, monarchies, government by one person, are really kind of looking at the United States as a threat, because if their own people back home become too dissatisfied, then they may have a revolution back home. And that was seen in the 1790s when France had its own revolution, kind of based on the American model. And for a while they had gotten rid of their monarchs. And so because of this, because Europe is so threatened by the idea of a strong democracy providing an example to its own people, they really want the Confederacy to win. They want the Union to fall apart, and they want this experiment in democracy to eventually fail. If the South can break away, they see the South as being a much weaker nation. European powers could probably invade and conquer it. If the North and South are split, then that means that places like Britain can invade from Canada and take over all those unorganized territories, which is going to severely weaken the Union. Spain looked at conquering new territories in the area, and also Mexico sees this as a way for it to retake the stuff that they had lost during the Mexican-American War. And so the European countries supported the Confederates for the most part. The only exception is Russia. Russia at the time is kind of its own agricultural nation. They have developed a relationship with the Union, but they're not going to really influence the war on one side or the other. The big nation that we need to take a look at is Great Britain. England at the time was officially neutral, but when looking at what they could gain by a southern victory, they could gain a new trading partner, they could get cheap cotton and other cheap agricultural goods from an area that was much closer to them than where they were getting their agricultural goods at the time, which would be India. And so they wouldn't have to go all the way around Africa in order to get their agricultural goods. They could just cross the Atlantic and get them from a strong confederacy. Also, British shippers and manufacturers could then ship their goods to Britain, from Britain to the Confederate States, because the Confederacy didn't have strong industry. And so these were going to be two big advantages for Britain if the Confederacy can remain independent. And so while officially neutral, Britain is rooting for the Confederacy to win, and they're going to look for any opportunities that they can in order to help the Confederacy win. One of the big controversial issues that occurs very early on in the war is the Trent Affair. There was a Union warship north of Cuba that was blockading southern ports. and a British mail steamer, which means that it was a steamship that carried the mail back and forth between the continent and Europe, was stopped by this Union blockading ship. On board, they find James Mason and John Slidell. These two were government officials for the Confederacy, and they were being sent to England in order to try and encourage the British to help the Confederacy during the war. The problem with this is, according to naval law, even today, if you are a ship at sea and you are in international waters, you still belong to the country whose flag you are flying. So if a United States ship is out in international waters and they are flying a U.S. flag, that means that that is officially United States territory. And so if any foreign powers try and board that ship, it would be the same as invading the United States. And so when this Union ship stops the Confederate ship, when this Union ship stops the British ship, they are actually invading, in a way, British sovereignty. They are invading British territory, and that was something that you weren't allowed to do. If these two government officials were on a Confederate ship, well, we were already at war with the Confederacy, and so that wouldn't make much of a difference. But since they were on a British ship, the Union captain should have taken the British ship to a port where it could be decided as to what rights the Union had to stop and search that British ship. And so the Union captain makes a big error here and this error threatens to bring Britain in officially to the war on the side of the Confederacy. Now, the Northerners thought that this was great, because they have prevented the Confederacy from getting messages and getting help from Britain. And so Britain is outraged by this invasion, and so they begin to send troops to Canada in order to prepare to defend themselves, or in order to help the Confederate cause. Britain leaves those troops in Canada, but does not officially enter the war. They kind of see that the South doesn't have much of a chance, and they don't really want to get involved. But this almost led war with Britain, and Lincoln eventually releases Mason and Slidell because he doesn't want to risk a war with Britain either. But Britain does serve as as kind of a naval base for the Confederacy. Since the Confederacy didn't have much opportunity and much material to build their own navy, Britain is building ships for them and then selling them to the Confederacy, with the hope that later on they will be able to get paid. And this really angers the Union quite a bit. But the British ships that they are building are very strong ships, very fast ships, and they're built for the sole purpose of trying to get in and out of the Confederacy past the Union blockade. The other thing that we need to talk about is what France does during the war. France was led by Napoleon III. They had tried to be a democracy for a while, and it was really just chaos, and it didn't work out very well. So they had gone back to a monarchy, and Napoleon III really didn't like the idea of a strong union, because he felt like what they could do is they could take over more territories in North and South America if the union failed. And so Napoleon III in 1863 actually sends troops to invade and capture Mexico for France. He puts Archduke Maximilian in as Emperor of Mexico, and the reason why he was able to do this was because the only power that was keeping Europe from creating more colonies in North and South America was the United States. And as long as the United States is busy fighting their own war, they don't have the opportunity to keep European powers out. Now, after the Civil War ends, Napoleon III abandons Mexico in 1867, and Mexico once again becomes independent. But as we've seen, Lincoln again has to be very careful not to bring in Britain or France against him during this war, and the Confederates are desperate for any help that they can get from Europe.